Welcome back to Cooking with Lara. Today we're going to learn a little bit about safety and hygiene in the kitchen, and along the way I'm going to make chicken stir fry and a veggie chow mein. The video will be divided into 4 sections: while you're at the supermarket, before you cook, while you cook, and after cooking. While you're at the supermarket, remember to check the best before and use by dates on all the products you're buying to make sure that they're going to last long enough for you to use them during the week. Use by dates are more important than best before dates because use by means it will go off after that date, whereas best before just means it's a bit better. It's better before that date. Something that can help you with this is if you make a meal plan in advance of shopping, and therefore you can check all of the use by dates before the date when you need to cook that food. It's also worth, on any packets or sauces that you're not eating all of in one sitting, it's worth checking on the packet what it says about storing them after they have been opened. Some things don't need to be stored in a fridge, such as these dried noodles, which will last forever. Cooking. Actually, maybe this is in before you're cooking. Before you're cooking, or during cooking. Before cooking, there are a few things you want to do to be nice and clean and hygiene safe. First, if you've got long hair, tie it back so that you don't get hairs in your food. No one wants that. Next, remember to wear a clean apron. It protects your clothes and also it's just nice, hygienic. And they tell you have to do that in the hygiene rules. And finally, wash your hands. It's very important to wash your hands before cooking, but also if, say, while you're cooking you accidentally cough, or touch your face, or touch your hair, or touch your puppy, remember to wash your hands again, because there are germs there. There are germs. And you don't want those germs in your food. When it comes to using chopping boards, some people might have a set of chopping boards for different things, such as these. As you can see, they've got little symbols on them to show you what's the things you want to chop on them. Some people might have wooden chopping boards, some people might have slightly thicker plastic chopping boards, such as this. The reason it's important to have separate chopping boards for different foods is because of cross-contamination, which is when one kind of food mixes with another kind of food, and that might end up in a situation where your raw chicken mixes with some sort of uncooked salad that you don't eat cooked, and therefore you've accidentally eaten some raw chicken, which could give you food poisoning. And you really, really don't want food poisoning. If you don't have multiple chopping boards, because most people don't, remember to wash your chopping board thoroughly after cutting raw meat, or cooked meat, or dairy. Most important is if you're using raw meat on a chopping board, wash that chopping board and use it for nothing else other than raw meat until it has been thoroughly washed, because you don't ever want to eat that. Please don't eat raw chicken. Raw chicken can give you the worst kind of food poisoning. It's horrible. Really horrible. Cooking safety. First we're going to talk about prepping vegetables and knife safety. So, first things first, knife safety. Knives are terrifyingly sharp, and you've got to be incredibly careful if you are using them. If you don't feel comfortable using them, that's fine. For a lot of things, you can just use scissors. We love scissors. But if you are comfortable using a knife, you want to use a knife, then here are some tips in terms of when you're cutting a vegetable, knife-wise. Firstly, how to hold your knife. Hold your knife as if you're shaking its hand. So, first finger here, your pointer finger here, taking into account the balance of it, the rest of your hand wraps around, and your thumb comes to the side, like so. When you're actually cutting something, keep your vegetable, or whatever you're doing, stable with your hand. Tuck your fingers under so they are protected, and keep your thumb tucked too, so that's not going anywhere. Make sure whatever you're chopping on is stabilised, so it's not going to move, and then, very carefully, rock the knife back and forth as you chop. You're meant to do this with your fingers much nearer the knife, but if you don't feel comfortable with that, just make sure As you approach your fingers, you move them. So, if you don't feel comfortable using a knife for something like a spring onion, you can just use scissors. But remember, keep your fingers out of the way of the scissors. Something to remember when you're prepping vegetables is to make sure that you've washed your vegetables, they're nice and clean, and if any of them need peeling in any way, you have peeled them. So this had an outer skin to it that was a bit past its best, that I just peeled off before we started cooking after washing it. And look how lovely and nice spring onion it is now. When chopping on a chopping board, it's very important to follow a few rules for your board for your own safety. First of all, only have one item that you're chopping on your board at once. If things start to build up and get a bit busy, as you're chopping, your knife might hit something else and skew. Make sure that your board is dry for the same reason, because if you're chopping and your board is a bit wet, you might slip and you might cut yourself. If your board has only just become wet for cutting a tomato, that's probably not too much of a big deal. But if you move on after the tomato, just wipe it dry or even wash it. And finally, make sure that your board is stable. So when I do this, it's not going anywhere. And if I was cutting directly onto this wooden chopping board, if it moved at all when I did this and I'm giving it a fair push, if it moved, I will put a damp cloth just underneath it flat, and that will help to stabilise your board as you're cutting so that your board doesn't move around, which again could lead to you cutting yourself. Once you've finished prepping all of your vegetables, you're going to need to wash all of your equipment. When carrying scissors, hold them by the sharp end when they're closed, so they're not going to cut you, and then hold them down to your side as you're walking. This means that if you fall over, you're not going to stab yourself, and you're not going to stab anyone else as you're walking either. It's very important. When walking with a knife, even more important, hold your knife just as you've been holding it before. Again, put it down to your side, facing downwards, like so. And if there are other people in your kitchen with you, say, I'm going to the washing up with a knife. Make it clear that you're walking with a knife so that no one gets in your way, and again, you don't stab anyone. Stabbing is bad. When washing up knives and scissors, if your scissors are particularly sharp, don't just leave them in a full washing up bowl, because someone might put their hands in that washing up bowl, not knowing you've put a knife in there, and cut themselves. Now I'm going to cook the noodles for the stir fry. When I've got a hot pan with boiling water, the first thing I want to make sure of is that the handle and the lid aren't hot. If they're made of metal on your pan and they are hot, you can either use oven gloves or a dry kitchen towel, such as this, folded over a few times to lift the lid. Mine isn't hot, so I'm going to lift it this way. Now I like to lift the lid upwards towards me on a tilt and let any drips drain off of it, and this keeps my hand away from any steam that comes out the top of that pan. That lid is hot. I know that my surface can deal with that heat, but if your surface might not, put it on some sort of heat protective pad to stop any harm coming to your sideboard. Now I've got boiling water here, which of course can scald you and it can burn you, so I don't want my hands going anywhere near it. Therefore, to put my noodles in, I'm going to lower them in on a metal slotted spoon. 1, 2. When I want to move with this pan, I need to carry it to the sink. When you're picking up and carrying hot things, there are a few things to remember to help keep you and the people around you safe. Don't pick up a pan that is too heavy for you to carry. If you start to lift something and you can tell it's too heavy, put it back down slowly and carefully and find a way to lessen the weight. That might be ladling out some water, it might be removing your noodles with a slotted spoon rather than draining them in a colander in the sieve, or the same with any vegetables you might be cooking or pasta. If you can carry your pan, and it's an easy weight, make sure that you're picking it up, ideally with oven gloves, such as these, that are thick and protective and a bit burned in my case, so that your hands aren't going to get burned. If, for some reason, you don't have oven gloves, use a towel that's folded over many, many times. If your oven gloves or your towel are in any way wet, do not use them to pick up something hot. As you touch the hot thing with something wet, the water that is on your oven gloves or your towel will steam, and you can get burned from that steam because it's very, very hot. It's not pleasant, and I wouldn't advise it, such as everything that's dangerous. Now then, I'm just going to give my noodles a stir. You don't need water stir. That, but right. One last thing before we take my noodles to the sink and drain them. When you've got your stove, even if your stove is off, it's been off for a while and it's cold, do not rest towels, oven gloves, anything of that sort on your stove, because they may set on fire and then you've got fire in your kitchen. It's not what anyone wants. No one wants it. So keep them away from your stoves. Also, when you're cooking on a stove, if you keep your pan handles all facing in a certain direction and away from where someone might move, no one's going to knock the pan handle with their body or their arm as they go past, and therefore you're not going to end up with boiling water all over the floor and or a person. Okay, time to rinse my noodles. I've got my oven gloves here. Well, yeah, puppet hands. I've got my oven gloves on here. I'm going to turn off the heat from underneath my noodles. I'm then going to pick up my pan. Yes, I can lift that, but I'm going to support it from underneath as well, just to make sure. And then as I'm moving with my hot pan, if someone else is in my kitchen, I'm going to say, hot pan coming through. I'm going to say it quite loudly and I'm going to say it clearly, because I want everyone to know to get out of the way. In a polite way. Hot pan coming through! Now, we're at the sink. I've already put a colander in the sink. The sink is otherwise empty. I've made it here without tripping over anyone. I've just emptied it all in there. Now this pan is hot, as is possibly my sieve. So I'm going to use my oven glove to get the handle of that. I'm going to put that down, shake off my noodles. I'm going to just let them sit to drain off fully whilst I get on with making the rest of the stir fry. A quick note on eggs. Eggs. This egg is from our chicken's bottom. This egg is from the supermarket. As you can see, this egg is a bit poopy. Whereas this egg is lovely and clean. Now then, this egg once looked like this egg. It's been through a cleaning process, which is great, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't wash our hands every time after handling an egg, because once upon a time it did look like this, and you just don't want that in your food or in your mouth. Once upon a time they were this big, and they still are. Prepping and cooking our chicken. When prepping your chicken, make sure that you're on a clean board, that's stable. Here we've got my chicken, it's within its use by date, and I've got mini fillets here. And generally speaking, what I would say is buy the size of chicken that you need to cook. If you need a chicken breast, buy a whole chicken breast. If you need smaller pieces than that, buy mini fillets, or if you need chunks, buy chicken chunks. It means less dangerous knife work for you, less having to use a chopping board necessarily. You can probably just dump it in the pan. Generally, it's a bit easier, and you've got to be really careful when you're handling raw chicken and washing up from it, because you want to make sure that everything is as clean as possible and there's no cross-contamination of your ingredients so that they don't mix. These are mini fillets. I just want them a little bit smaller for putting in my stir fry, and I could do that with a knife, but I'm going to use scissors today because personally I find it a lot easier to cut up something like this using some kitchen scissors. So, let's go down to the scissors, to the feet, the chicken. There's my chicken. I'm going to put this into the bin right away, and I'm going to be careful touching my bin in case I've got chickeny hands. I might even ask someone to open the bin for me. I don't have to. Please open my bin. No! So I've got my raw chicken here. I've got my scissors. I'm going to cut it into some slightly smaller pieces. And something to be noted, when it comes to prepping meat, don't take it out of the fridge before you need to, in terms of when you're going to prep it. And if I was preparing this now and only cooking it in, say, 20 minutes, I would put this back in the fridge in a sealed container, because we don't want it to come past fridge temperature until we cook it. Okay, My chicken is all prepped now, I think. Here I have a pan with some oil in. Okay, so I'm going to take my chicken and I'm going to put it in my pan. Ooh, yeah. Chicken. I've just put my chicken in my pan and spread it out evenly. And whilst it's starting to cook, I need to make sure that I wash my hands really well and I wash my chopping board and my scissors and anything that has come in contact with the chicken. If any chicken juices have gone on your side, wipe your side down with antibacterial spray. Even if you don't think they have, it might be well worth it doing it. Just putting it out there. So I'm going to go to the sink, wash off my board and my hands. I always find it best to initially rinse my board with cold water and then scrub it with soap and hot water, just because that, if you immediately put hot water onto a meat chopping board, it cooks the proteins onto the board. So if you rinse them off first and then wash it, it's just gets it a little bit cleaner. So I'm cooking my chicken and I've washed my hands after handling the raw chicken, and it's in its pan and it started cooking, and I've got this spoon to stir it with, and we want to make sure that our chicken is completely cooked through. So I'm going to take these scissors, chop a piece in half to look at the inside. Because on the outside, these are all looking pretty cooked at this point. Now, if I were cooking a whole chicken or a different piece of meat, there are different ways of checking this. Always the foolhardy, not going to let you down method is cutting it in half and looking at the inside. You know what you can see. But if I'm cooking chicken or pork and it's a big roasting joint, what I tend to do is I will skewer the thickest part of the meat. When I pull the skewer out, then you can check just after that if the juices that come out of where you've skewered it are running clear. That tends to mean that your thing is cooked. And if you want to be absolutely sure, you can cut into it. It will look solid. It will be all the same colour. If chicken, white. If pork, it might be a little bit more on the brown or browner side. It won't look at all jelly-ish. And I tend to try and go for the bigger pieces when I'm chopping meat in half to test whether it's cooked. Just because if your biggest piece of meat is cooked, your small piece of meat should also be cooked.
Some notes on leftovers. Put any leftover food into a Tupperware with a lid. Wait until it has completely cooled before you put the lid upon the Tupperware and before you put it into the fridge. This avoids any condensation. If you're freezing any leftovers, make sure to chill them in the fridge before you then transfer them to the freezer so they don't raise the temperature of your freezer.
Okay, a quick note on fridge organisation. Generally you put raw meats towards the bottom and you put your salads and dairy towards the top. Any cooked foods, again, also towards the top, and try to make sure everything's in kind of a sealed container or bowl, just to stop, if something does leak, it's not going to leak down onto something beneath it. I personally quite like to use my salad drawer as a meat drawer because it keeps it completely away from everything else in my fridge, but that's just a personal preference, not something you necessarily have to do yourselves. Thank you for watching! Like the video if you like puppies. If you want to see more of our works, click on the links. Goodbye!